episode. Before we dive into our conversation today, I want you to make a quick thought experiment. So imagine if every time you had a private conversation in your living room, a company you have never met was taking notes, and then they sold these notes to someone else who used them to try and influence your next big decision. You would slam the door, right? So, welcome to the digital age, and that's exactly what's happening, just in ways we can always see. This is the policy blueprint, and my name is Akinaton Lazar, and I'm also joined by Christopher.
Hi guys, welcome. It's good to be here. It's good to be here. Also, it's good to be here. The second episode. I'm excited. Excited.
So, today we're pulling back the curtain on the multi trillion dollar trade happening just beneath our screen. The topic is your data, the product, who sets the rules. And we have an incredible expert, which we have the name of Dr. Luis Luna Reyes.
Thank you very much, Akhenaton and Chris, for the invitation. Happy to be back,
Always.
and congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's create another scenario and let's think about one single thing that you did this morning. It can be to search for a birthday gift. It can be to use a map app. It can be you using Instagram Reels. These are perfect examples. And guess what? These are the free services. And that is the bait. Your data, your intention, your life. That's the product. This system has a name: surveillance capitalism. So here's our roadmap for today. We will start by diagnosing the problem. What is the data economy? Then we will explore the prescription. What can policy actually do? And we will end by future proofing. How do we build rules that last? So Christopher and I will be tag teaming the questions, and your chat is our third co-host. We plugged in. So please use the chat. So let's start with the first question. Let's cut to the jargon. Dr. Luis, when we say data is the new oil, what are we missing? How is data actually functioning as a commodity right now?
Well, I think that data definitely is a commodity right now, but as everything, it's a movement that it didn't happen just in one day, right? So I think that we can trace back this value of the data to the beginnings of computing, right? Back in the 50s and the 60s, when the larger organizations like banks and government organizations started to develop all these huge information systems to help them processing data, processing the payroll, processing social security requests, and all these different things. I believe that with the popularization of databases in the 90s, uh, when all these new standards that make databases more easy to organize and search, then they really become popular to operationalize many of the daily operations within the organizations, right? So then relational databases, as they are called, and some of you have learned probably a little bit of them in one of your core classes in the MPA. They made the gathering data about organizations' operations quite pervasive, right? And of course, uh, the use of all this data that was being produced within the organization was to try to optimize operations. So how to make the company to run better. And then with the internet like the last development in the late 90s and the early 2000s, then this just open organizations to a new opportunity of data, because what they learned was that with the internal data, they could only do this much, right? Because they were missing context. They were missing things that were happening in the world or in the cities where their plants were operating, or the stores were operating. And they were missing the activities of their final consumers, right? But then with the internet, the internet, they realized that they could actually trace every single movement of the things that we do when we are trying to buy something online. So they were able to put together the information that they were already being very good to gather in their day-to-day operations with the information that they had from the user when they were visiting their websites. And then if you wish, so the website become almost everywhere when we started to use these smart devices, right? Because now they can trace what we do, what we think, what we say, what we visit, what we search for, everywhere that we are, right? So the potential of increasing sales when you get all this data together is, for a private corporation, is just too difficult to resist, right? It is just too difficult to resist, and that's why they all are trying to take advantage of all the value that is being produced. I don't know if that
Amazing,
was.
amazing.
Mhm,
And the power shift is immense, as we can think about. And also,
mhm.
it makes me think of a old saying: if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So, is that still the whole truth, or has the business model evolved into something even more nuanced?
Well, I think that in general, I think that is in general a true assertion, unless you live in the European Union, and probably even there are some limitations, right? Because so the problem is that anytime that you are getting some product or service for free, so you get all these user agreements, and these user agreements are in fact telling you what are the ways in which this organization is going to be managing their data. But then, as every legal instrument, for a regular person, it's basically impossible to navigate. I don't know if you have even scrolled through one of those user agreements, but these are just pages and pages and pages with legal terms that make for people really difficult to manage the access to their own data. But those are supposed to be the instruments to help you not to be the product, right? Because you can opt out if you don't want to be the product. And I think that the European Union is probably the place where there is the most comprehensive regulations to protect the privacy of people, meaning that the things that organizations can actually do in those countries are much less and much more controlled than the things that they can do everywhere else in the world, right? So then one first step is to have a regulation that actually can help people to do it. And the other one that is, I think that is not necessarily a technical problem, because I have seen many different technical solutions, right? But as everything, you need to actually get somebody to adopt those technical solutions. Because the other thing is to give the user actually much more choice than what we have right now, right? Because nowadays, well, we can only choose to use the service or not to use the service, right? Where we should be able to actually choose what is the data that we are willing to share, what is the data that we are not willing to share, and we should have much more choice, right? Nowadays, the main problem that makes us really being the product in many cases is that the choices that we have are limited, and that the service that we're getting are convenient too, right? So because I think it is convenient to see new recommendations when I connect to my Netflix account. It is kind of interesting, right? To for me, or useful to me, to see these recommendations to new movies that I probably will never imagine to see or to watch, but because they're using all my data and the data of many other people, then I get those good recommendations. It is also good that anytime that I start playing a song in Spotify, Spotify takes care of the rest of the music selection for the evening, right? So there is a lot of convenience, let's say, and on the other hand, there is a too limited choice, right? Probably if we had more choice, it could be also a better thing.
So from the example with Spotify already giving you another song, we can see that data itself is not just a raw material, but it can be seen as a predictive engine. So how has this new engine fundamental, fundamentally broken and rewired the relationship between us as citizens, the big tech corporation, and our governments?
So I think that here probably there are like two separate relationships here, right? So because I think that one is the relationship that we have with the private corporations, and a very different one is the one that we have with government. And I believe that here in the U.S., for example, government is much more regulated in the way that they can actually gather information or share information about us than private organizations do, right? So if you compare that with China, for example, in China, government really gathers a lot of information from citizens, and it uses it for many different reasons. Uh, this may make the life of citizens more convenient, just like it makes the life of us in our relationship with Spotify more convenient, but also it has its disadvantages, right? It has its disadvantages. But at least here in the US, my view is that government is much better regulated than the private sector. So in my relationship with government, I, in general, feel like my privacy is much more protected than when I am working with a private corporation, right? And I think that's a good thing. I believe that's a good thing. But then when we are dealing with private corporations, uh, I think that the problem is that we become some sort of a statistic, right? And then the problem of becoming a statistic is that, as in many other statistics, there are biases and there are problems, right? So Spotify really doesn't care about me as a client, but I am just part of a group of people that tends to listen some sort of music depending on what is the initial song that I choose. And then I just get all the information or all the music that this group of people tends to listen, right? So and there is over there some sort of self-selection bias, if you wish. So it is true that I can find music that I like, but probably I will never be able to explore other genres as if I really were talking to other people, right? In real life. And sometimes this bias that comes with this interaction seems trivial, but it can really affect the way that you interact with things in your life. For just to give you an example of how this bias operates, because of course, so all these recommendations are coming from mathematical models that are using the data to be trained to select those recommendations, right? That they make. But this kind of training happens everywhere. so when I got my first Google Assistant, I was very excited because my Google Assistant was able to know that I was bilingual and that I spoke Spanish and English, and I could speak in English and Spanish to my Google Assistant and ask them to do everything that I wanted, right, in any language. And it worked very well at first, but it reached a point where I actually had to cancel my bilingual personality from my Google Assistant because it was not understanding me at all. Instead of getting better and better over time, it was getting worse and worse over time. And well, I don't know the exact answer for that problem, but my hypothesis is that there is probably not many users of the Google Assistant that are bilingual and that have this strong accent that I have. Now, given that this model keeps being trained based on the user base, right? So people like me gets underrepresented in the training data. And as a consequence, then my Google Assistant doesn't understand me at all, right? Especially when they are trying to guess if I am speaking either Spanish or English. If I tell them I only speak English, they understand me very well, even with my strong accent. If I tell them I only speak Spanish, they understand me very well. But if I tell them I'm bilingual, they don't understand anything at all. So, which is kind of this bias. And then the relationship with the organizations is kind of broken, right? Because especially if you are not a well-represented group within the clients of this organization, you get marginalized with all these different processes that the organizations are now relying on to reach out to you. And that happens everywhere. We have, just to give another example that seems trivial, but is really important from my perspective, is the work with one of the PhD students that I know from our PhD in information science. She's actually studying this kind of bias that I just described, but in the clothing industry. So there is people that is missing an arm or a leg, or that their body shape is underrepresented in the user use, right? Of Macy's, let's say, right? And then whatever any of those organizations will base all the recommendations on the data without knowingly discriminating all the people that has some differences only because they are underrepresented in their consumer base. So all this data-oriented decision making is actually marginalizing many, and you can see that in any domain that you can think of, right? Only because the user base of services tend to be not as diverse as we are all. And when I say diverse, I'm talking about diversity of anything, right? Even like having mobility, anything that you can think of.
Thank you so much. I think with that background, giving us the complexity of this issue, and I want to bring in this question now. So looking at that, how can governments design policies that protect citizens' privacy without stifling innovation or economic growth? We are seeing this is happening, but at the end of the day, we are dealing with citizens, with the public. This is being consumed by the public. So end of the day, I feel like the government also has got a role to play in terms of what is consumed by the public. So my question is, how can the government design policies that protect that privacy without also, at the end of the day, also crippling innovation or economic growth? Please.
Yeah, so I think that you can find the balance, and we have found the balance in some places, right? So, for example, for educational institutions here in the U.S., we have appropriate regulations to protect the privacy of students and giving them access to their student records and 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 that protect their rights, to not only to fix them, to check them, but also to be able to modify them and not to be shared widely, right? So we have done also, I think, reasonably well in the health domain. Uh, it is harder in the health domain, right? Because again, uh, in practice, to be able to navigate better all the different uh, components of the health system, we end up giving up a lot of our privacy rights, because we need to allow our service provider to share information with the pharmacy, with the insurance, and if we don't, we are kind of in trouble, right? Because then we won't be able to get any service, and then we get into that initial problem that we were discussing, right? Where I should have more choice, right? So the problem becomes when I have to uh, decline to all my privacy rights for that specific interaction. So, but that would be an example where we are doing a reasonably better job than in many other industries, right? So education, health, they have their own regulations that are trying to protect both, right? The rights of the users of the system, and to promote this innovation. Hopefully, we could have much more choice, and I think that the same thing can be done more in general. Uh, the approach of the European Union, I find it very useful because it actually is not specific to an industry, but is covering every industry, right? Trying to, just like we do here for health and education, have like this umbrella policy that protects people's privacies and limits the things that organizations can or cannot do. And I find that approach interesting. The problem that it has again is that there is not much choice for the people in how they can select what are those kind of personal or private or data they want to keep private and the one that they want to keep open. So I think that would be another interesting thing. Again, technically is possible, but as in many policy problems, the technical part is not the problematic part, right? This getting agreement of all the actors in how to operate what will make the main problem. But I believe it's definitely possible to have a policy that allows those things if we are able to gather together all the key stakeholders and get with them the right agreements.
Maybe my follow up to that question, Luis, is so since we have these, I think most of the context that you're mentioning in the United States, there's been some progress that has been made in different sectors, the education sector, the health sector. But at the end of the day, this big data, it's an international phenomenon that is happening. Would you think that we are supposed to have an international policy, if I may say, that can guard some of these issues, a universal, maybe not a universal, but something international that is guiding, not just countries in Europe or even Africa, in terms of privacy data, governments? Can there be a framework that can guide governments, not just from Europe or from China, but also around the world? Because this issue of data is revolving around the world. When there's a breach, I remember there's a time where there was a data breach in the airspaces where to be held down because of that, because it was an international data breach. So my question is, how is there a possibility whereby we can have a framework that is going to guide the government in terms of all like government in different areas of the globe?
So again, I wish that we had here Professor Ray Kozlowski, because he actually it's an expert in how all these data issues can go across
Wow.
across frontiers or borders across countries, right? He may have a different position about it, but then again, so the European Union will be a good example of things that can be done, right? Because the European Union regulation, it's actually regulating all the member countries, right?
Mm.
And it's not only it's actually drafted in a way that it actually goes beyond the borders of those European Union member states. Because if any organization, wherever is sitting, is providing services for citizens of the European Union, then they have to comply with this regulation. So then if there is a US based or a Brazilian based organization that is providing services in Brazil, but those services in Brazil are offered to European Union citizens, they they have to comply with the regulation. Now, so the problem is how to enforce that, right? How to
Mhm.
enforce that thing, and I think that the European Union actually can pose sanctions to those organizations, and those sanctions can be placed only on member states. But if you are Google and you are getting a big sanction in all the European member states, even when your wrongdoing was in the United States, that probably is enough leverage, right, to convince Google to improve their behavior. And regulations actually have an impact on the behavior of corporations. Uh, Again, one other student from information science, Stora Knight, on her dissertation, she traced the regulation from the European Union and how this regulation was actually having an impact on the local regulations of the different member states. And actually, that was also having an impact on the organizations that were having operations within those member states. So, having this international umbrella regulation, it is actually making a difference, at least in that context. Uh, and to make sure that she was really tracing a true change or a true impact, she compared the European Union to the United States, some sort of the same kind of thing, right? But here, our states are all independent, right? But they follow federal leadership. But we lack at the federal level this kind of unified umbrella policy to protect privacy. And then she could see differences between the behaviors of organizations in the states of the American Union and in the states of the European Union because of that different approach. So regulation actually takes place. But uh, so we're also have to, I think that I also need to acknowledge that we are living a moment where these international agreements are kind of being challenged, right, strongly. So every country or many countries are actually not being very friendly to these international organizations trying to coordinate policy. So I think that even though it's possible, probably in the next few years, it's going to be challenging to be able to produce coordination among countries to protect data privacy or to do many different things.
Mm. Thank you so much, Luis. And I think what also bring is this is what I had a follow-up question was in most, especially in most developing countries, I'll look at Africa from that aspect. Most of them are still some government are still working on their ICT IT policy frameworks. They are still trying to navigate. How can they be able to protect privacy? How can they be able to protect? And I think also what you mentioned that the implementation part of it is something that's also problematic, because you also need the infrastructure for you to be able to make sure that you hold the big corporations accountable in terms of that. So thank you for that. I will leave this to Aiton to continue with our conversation.
Mhm.
Yes. That's amazing. So, from everything I've heard, um, one of the things that I would like to bring up, because usually with whatever subject, we can't really avoid AI. So, with that being said, let me see. So, how knowing that AI is involved with everything, or let's say almost everything, how can we create a one piece of data policy and keep in mind that it will have to be implemented like right now,
Mhm.
so to avoid any bigger crisis in the next 5 years, for example.
So I think that is a super important question, because none of the things that we are talking about as problems with data use and data exploitation by organizations could be really possible without artificial intelligence, right? So even those early applications back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, they were machine learning algorithms working in the favor of those corporations that were the pioneers taking advantage of data. So nobody was calling it AI back in 1999, but the algorithms and the machine learning that is being used today was pioneer being used in that time, right? So then uh, to be able to make predictions using other users and your own behavior to increase your consumption or to increase the convenience of services, some form of artificial intelligence is being used. And and the problem with that is that for those algorithms to be useful in the predictions that they do, privacy needs to be placed a little bit at risk, right? Uh, so just to give you an example, so a lot of the people doing computer science and doing all this artificial intelligence using data, they say private data is not, meaning that if you get a data set where you really take out any data piece that will be able to use or that could be used to actually identify who is the owner of that data, then you will get a useless data set that will be of not help for anybody, right? And they won't be able to make any prediction using that data. So data that is useful to make predictions is also um, uh, it also carries the risk that people within the data set can be identified. Because if you are successful in de-identifying the data, that data becomes more or less useless for any application, right? So and the challenge then becomes kind of larger, right? Because if we really wanted to protect the privacy of the people at maximum, that will really block for complete the potential applications of artificial intelligence or any other kind of computer prediction or classification processes that could be helpful to improve services to people. And even though some of those services can be as trivial as knowing what is the next song, right? In Spotify, some of other potential uses can actually save lives, For example, another of my former students was using Medicare data trying to predict who would be from a large group of people who would be most likely to get really ill in the next 18 months, so that the team taking care of this person could actually get a note. You have one of your clients is in a very high risk of being very, very ill in the next few months. So pay attention to that person, because they may be in trouble, right? So although probably the methods are similar to the methods used by Spotify to predict the next song, this is a much more relevant topic, right? So and probably useful, and then probably the regulations are not only about how to make this data private, but also how to define under which conditions can data that is not uh, de-identified being used. What kind of infrastructures you need to actually read or get that data to be analyzed to get all these good things. Yeah, so
So
lots of interesting things.
yeah, of course. So this makes me think about first principles, where us as human being, we always try to fix a system that might be unfortunately basically faulty. So if we were to think about one, so let's say we wanted to start from the scratch, right? So what will be a equitable, human centric data governance model that will, and how it will actually look like underground?
So I think, well, we have several data governance systems already on the ground. Uh, for example, just to give you an example, so the governance system that allows for interconnectivity of data carriers, that is a governance system that already exists in the world, that allows for us to have seamless access to people everywhere, right? And of course, they have been trying also to exchange data to make privacy protection a more effective way, and to try to prevent security breaches, right? That is so. So of course, there is a commercial motivation for all of them to share the infrastructure, and there is less commercial motivation to protect the data or to protect the security of their systems, right? Because it has impacts on their reputation, for example. So then it's harder to be successful on those areas. But we have many good examples of how the internet is being governed, right? So there is already something. Uh, we are missing better regulations, I believe. So if we had better regulations, more comprehensive privacy regulations, that could be something that may, even with the imperfect system that we have nowadays, could actually help um, for different kinds of applications to have better protections. So I don't know if anybody could even imagine a whole governance system, uh, for the whole world, as you were suggesting earlier today, and not even for a big country like the United States. Um, I can tell you that a few years ago, I was working with one of the states in the American Union, uh, and they were creating a new office that was the office of the chief data officer, and this chief data officer was actually trying to produce a governance system for the government of that state, and then at the heart of this governance system they will have what they wanted to call a data authority. And this data authority will be in charge actually to try to promote, to start with, better standards about the ways that data was being defined across systems in that state. As part of that process, I I had the opportunity to talk to many people doing data management in this state, and believe me, the diversity of practices, the diversity of systems was really, really impressive. We spoke with more than 100 people. And I don't know if you, in any of your methods classes, when you're talking about qualitative interviews or qualitative data, people says, well, that you will find at some point that saturation, when you start listening the same stories from people. Well, we were in the interview number 100, and we were listening to new stories of how data was being managed in this state. So just figuring out what would be the data management standards, standard data dictionaries, and all these different basic technical things, ways of managing metadata. That is a big part of governance, right? So, because we couldn't govern anything if we don't have all these definitions of processes and the object itself, right? So then we really need to be working on that part. So that will be an important part of governance. But then you will need to have all the other part of governance that needs to deal with quality, that needs to deal with and with the use of the data, what are appropriate ways of sharing and appropriate ways of not sharing, defining what kind of data can only be used in a place without connection to the internet, what kind of data can be shared that can be used, what kind of data could be open, right? Uh, and then this data authority for the state government would be that kind of the heart of that governance system that for sure will have to include representatives from all the different agencies, and will have to have many different working groups, right? Creating the standards, creating the process and the standard practices, and all the different policies that are necessary, right? So only for, if we were thinking on having a governance system only for the government side in that one state, that would be a project for many, many, many years, right? So, but then it incorporates both the technical parts, the process part, the groups and stakeholders part. And if we make that also to include the private sector, then that will make the thing even more complicated, right? So the good thing is that we have already some of those governance groups, right? And in some areas of application, again, there is much better standards than in others. Just to go back, if we think about health or finance, we have so many good standards actually to have better data definitions and better metadata descriptions. So these are areas that for many reasons have been have the motivation to develop such things, right? And then they are in a much better shape than other areas. And they actually, especially in the area of health, we have much more experience in how to manage those public-private collaborations in the way that we manage data and protect people's privacy.
Thank
I don't
you
know if
very
that
much
was
for
answering your question.
yeah. Thank you very much for your clarity and insights. So I pass it by to Christopher now.
Okay, thank you so much, Liz. Thank you so much. I'm loving how this is being unpegged. And I think it also gives also even MPA students, not just MPA students, but also all students who are also, but this is an important area of where we are going, where we are in, and where we are going. And I think it's important that each and every major is fitting in this discussion today. But as we get close to the end of our conversation, I wanted maybe to bring maybe to ask this now that now I want to come back to the local context. We have these public institutions, right, that are also entrusted with public service delivery. My question is now, how can those institutions effectively regulate global tech corporations whose operations transcend a state or federal jurisdictions? How do they regulate? They are entrusted with public information, they're entrusted with public service delivery, but how can they regulate some of these global tech companies in terms of service delivery?
Oh, so, well, the only the if just to if I go back to part of our previous conversation, I think that the only way is it's so first of all they need to have the regulations in place, right? So that will be the very first step, uh, to have a good set of regulations. And then the other one is it's providing effective sanctions, right? I don't think that without effective sanctions, any corporation will behave. And then when you are talking about global corporations, well, then global corporation, depending on the size of the government that you are dealing, they will have much more leverage than the government, right? So let's say that the county government from Albany can't do much, right? To force Walmart to do something about anything, right? Because of the imbalance of power. They can create some sanctions, but I don't know how much impact they will get, right? So then you really need to I think that in any of these fights, you need some government that is large enough so that the sanctions become effective, right? And of course, I think that the sanctions need to be serious, right? Because in many cases, corporations just break many rules, and they make trillions of dollars, and then they get a sanction that is a couple $1 million, right? So probably that uh, incentivizes breaking the rules a little bit, right? Rather than because you're making trillions and your sanction is, even if it's 1 billion, it is not necessarily the best way. So sanctions have to be commensurate to the benefits that organizations are making when they're breaking the rules. So yeah, so I think there is lots of complexities in those, in reinforcing regulations. Mhm.
Yeah, so maybe our concluding question is, so we have MPA students that are studying public administration, political science, information science, that are watching, even other students that are, but in particular, I'm concerned also the public affairs students, right, that are studying policy, that are studying public administration, public management, and profit. What are some of the concluding remarks that you can give in relation to what's this aspect of data, this sort of data policy, this data age that we have? What concluding remarks would you give them to would you give to them pertaining this area in relation to what they are doing now?
Yeah, so I think that everybody that goes into public affairs, and when I say public affairs, I am thinking not only in government in any of the different levels, but also I'm thinking about international organizations, and also I am thinking about nonprofits, right? I think that what we need to do is to get some basic understanding of data and data management, and the different roles that we can be playing as we work in any of these organizations, right? I think that a lot of the graduates from an MPA or from an MIA or from an Master in Political Science, if they end up working for government or for a nonprofit, it is very likely that they will become data stewards. And data stewards is people that is actually advocating for the quality and the data rights or the privacy rights of the people that they serve, right? Uh, so at the same time that they take care that the data continues to be useful, right? So one of my former colleagues here in Rockefeller College, Professor Sharon Doss, actually had a quite an interesting paper from about probably 20 years ago when exactly she was saying, well, everybody in public service should understand that we are dealing with this trade-off, right? Of being stewards of the people that we serve, the rights, and in this case, their data privacy, and the usefulness of this data in providing for them better services, right? So then I think that this is going to be a trade-off that we will have to continuously manage as we are a public affairs professional, right? Either in a nonprofit or in a state government or in the federal government or in a local government. We're going to be always dealing with that tension between advocating for the rights of the people that we serve and protecting the privacy of their data and effectively using this data that we are gathering to produce a better service and to deliver a more comprehensive service for them in a way that makes sense, right? So I think this is something that we all need to keep in mind as we go into this profession.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think today, I believe your audience, they're going to be going through this podcast session for our second episode. They're going to learn and appreciate some of these things, and I think it will help us to gain that practical beyond the classroom. This is beyond the classroom experience, whereby we have these discussions, conversations about some of the critical things that we feel like are also impacting the public affairs. And we just want to thank you, Lawrence, for coming to our second episode. I said we need to bring back again as we delve into this. And I hope also our students, also our audience, are going to also watch. They're going also to get to have some takeaway notes on some of these issues, and as they embark on whether it's their research, whether it's their internship, whether it's they get to have this appreciation of some of the background, the dynamics around the times that we in the digital age. But I think for today, this will be our second session today of our podcast. Thank you so much, Lawrence, for coming to our second session. I want also to appreciate Aiton, who was also co-moderating part of this session, this area also. So I was also learning from him. Is also his area, and I hope that we're going to be preparing for more episodes and more sessions. We're going to bring some of different areas that I think some of our faculty members, some of people that are in the professional field can come and have this conversation. I believe that most of the things can be understood when we're having conversations. We have time to discuss about these different things. And I hope in our next episode, you are going to join us and we're going to have to con with these conversations as we try to nurture and mold public affairs professionals who are up to date with what's happening around them. But thank you so much. This will be the end of our podcast session. I'm going to Aiton, do you have any last words? So,
Thank you very much,
yeah,
Chris. It was an
yeah.
enjoyable lunch, I guess, the lunchtime.
So,
So two keywords that maybe I would like to leave out. So throughout our discussion, awareness and actions are the two keywords that we need to keep in mind moving forward. And also, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions and demanding transparency, because this is your digital future, so you have to claim it. But thanks for the enjoyable moment. It was good to learn and to ask questions as well. So thank you.
Thank you so
And
much.
thank you, Chris, and thank you, Akhenaton, for the invitation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Lawrence. Hey guys, see you next time on next episode, the third episode. See you.